chapter 12. Oh, wow. Oh. So our reading today is John chapter 12, verse 1 to 18. 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, home of Lazarus, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Lazarus and his sisters hosted a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who joined him at the table. Then Mary took an extraordinary amount, almost 3/4 of a pound, of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She anointed Jesus' feet with it, then wiped his feet dry with her hair. The house was filled with the aroma of the perfume. Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, complained, "This perfume was worth years' wages. Why wasn't it sold and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He carried the money bag and would take what was in it. Then Jesus said, "Leave her alone. This perfume was to be used in preparation for my burial. And this is how she has used it. You'll always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me." Many Jews learned that he was there. They came not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. The chief priests decided they would kill Lazarus too. It was because of Lazarus that many of the Jews who had deserted them and come to believe in Jesus. The next day, the great crowd that had come to festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him. They shouted, "Hosanna! Blessings on the one who come in the name of the Lord. Blessing on the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, just as it is written, "Don't be afraid, daughter Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on the donkey's colt." His disciples didn't understand these things at first. After he was glorified, they remembered that these things had been written about him, and they had done these things to him. The crowd who had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead were testifying about him. That's why the crowd came to meet him, because they had heard about this miraculous sign that he had done. Therefore the Pharisees said to each other, "See, you accomplished nothing. Look, the whole world is following him." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, good morning. Mark said it, but I'm excited about being here with you over these next 3 months. You only have to bear with me for 3 months, okay? That's all. Palm Sunday. What kind of comes to your mind? You don't have to answer out loud, just think about it. What comes to your mind when you think of Palm Sunday? Think back to your childhood. I grew up here in Kelowna, and the things that come to my mind, I think about springtime. I think about warmer days. Not quite as warm as last week. That was our kind of record-setting days. I think of lots of songs with the word Hosanna in it, right? Hosanna. I think of new life springing out of kind of the death of winter. That cold, dark time becomes life again. If you want to look on the screens, I just want to talk a little bit about how Palm Sunday is celebrated in some other countries and how they've kind of adapted it a little bit. Palm trees don't grow in Poland, right? So people make artificial palm leaves, decorating them with tissue paper, flowers, and ribbons. Some of these fake palms can be 30 meters tall. That's 100 feet, for those of you not in the metric system just yet. And it takes multiple people to hold those fronds in the air. People in the Philippines will decorate and weave palm fronds into complicated shapes called palaspas. They're blessed at a church and brought back to their homes for luck. People in Norway decorate their homes with birch twigs and painted eggs for Palm Sunday. Not for Easter, painted eggs for Palm Sunday. Lots of places have the week before Easter off, and people will travel to their cottages and go skiing or reading and family time. The whole week of Easter off, wouldn't that be nice? Chicks and eggs are common symbols of Easter, but in the Netherlands, it's all about the rooster. In some towns, kids have a procession where they carry around crosses decorated with ribbons, and on top of them is a rooster made out of bread. Not a real rooster, a rooster made out of bread. Pussy willows are a lot easier to find in Latvia than palms. So the day is known actually as Pussy Willow Sunday. Parents even wake kids up on the Sunday with pretend swats with willow branches. Many celebrations on the island of Haiti are a mixture of Catholic and local voodoo traditions. They can involve processions and traveling bands playing drums, maracas, and trumpets. Trick-or-treating in Finland is not only for Halloween. Kids dressed up as Easter witches and go around to houses offering willow branches in exchange for candy. That's right. Don't those witches look really terrifying? Christians in Ethiopia call Palm Sunday Hosanna Sunday. Oh, that's it, Hosanna Sunday. After the cheer people greeted Jesus with when he arrived in Jerusalem. People weave palm fronds into elaborate rings to wear on that day, a constant reminder of a ring on your hand. Willow branches are a big part of the celebration in Bulgaria. Again, along with flowers. Palm Sunday is more often called Flower Day because of all the springtime blooms. People will make wreaths of pussy willows and flowers and decorate their homes, often having big family dinners on the day. And in some towns in Belgium, there are Palm Sunday processions, and kids go door to door offering palm leaves in exchange for, not candy, coins. They will, great way to make money, right? For kids on a Sunday. See, Palm Sunday was not a tradition in Israel at the time of Jesus. There was no Palm Sunday at that time. But the use of palm branches was customary in the region for celebrating joy and triumph, especially as it pertained to kings and conquerors who were sometimes welcomed home by placing palm branches on the road ahead of them. This was a practice used for political leaders. Now, Jesus, of course, did not intend to become the king of Jerusalem on that particular Palm Sunday. His kingship was of a different type. His purpose was to die as the sacrificial lamb for the sins of the world, not become the next king of Israel. To abolish, and that's what was thought, was to abolish the rule of the Romans, as many people in the crowd assumed that he would do on that day. Why the big fuss about Jesus' arrival on this particular Sunday before this particular Passover? Jesus had entered the city of Jerusalem many times, for many other festivals in the past. He had come to Jerusalem at least 3 times a year since his birth for the following required pilgrimages for Israelites at the time. Those were what? Any of you remember? It's for Passover, it was for Pentecost, and it was for Sukkot, or the Festival of Booths. Not the Festival of Booze, okay? Booths. The festival in the fall. So there was 2 festivals in the spring and 1 in the fall that all Israelites were expected to make the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. That means that at least Jesus made that pilgrimage 100 times in his life. 33 times 3, okay, for the mathematicians among us. At least 100 times he went up as part of his cultural obligation to go to the festivals in Jerusalem. So why was there such a reaction this time? That's what we're going to look at today. You see, nothing happens in a vacuum. And I don't mean inside a vacuum cleaner. There's lots that happens inside of a vacuum. We don't even want to know what happens inside of a vacuum cleaner. Nothing happens, especially significant things, without there being a context to it. First and foremost, it was the Father's time for Jesus to die, to be buried, to be resurrected, and to ascend back to the Father. It was the Father's timing. Jesus had accomplished everything that the Father had asked him for. There was only 1 week left in Jesus' assignment, and it was the hardest week of Jesus' earthly life. If you knew how you were going to die, how would you react? How would you try and change it? What would you avoid? Jesus knew how he was going to die. He knew he would be tortured and executed in the most severe and humiliating way known to man at the time. And what did he do? He stepped into it willingly. We heard this story read to us already this morning by Daniel. And I asked that the story would start with the night before, the Saturday night supper at Lazarus, Martha, and Mary's house. It sheds a lot of light on why people responded to Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem that particular Sunday. Notice the commentary at the end, those last 2 verses, verses 17, 18, and then I'll read also verse 19. It said this: "The crowd who had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead were testifying about him. That's why the crowd came to meet him, because they had heard about this miraculous sign that he had done." Did you catch that? That's why the crowd came to meet him, because they had heard about this miraculous sign that he had done. And verse 19 says, "Therefore the Pharisees said to each other, 'See, you've accomplished nothing. Look, the whole world is following him.'" They were inspired to do something very different. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem was recognized this time because of what had happened to Lazarus. It is worth us going back 1 chapter into John chapter 11 to see what happened and why it caused such a commotion that next weekend. And why the arriving of Jesus to Jerusalem For the people was Jesus coming as a conquering hero and not as that rabbinical teacher from the north, that Galilean from the north. So what I'd like to do is we're going to look at John chapter 11. You can follow along in your Bibles if you want. It's not going to be on the screen. What I would encourage you to do is, as I read this, just kind of imagine some of the scenes, because John 12 says, this is the reason why Palm Sunday was what it was, why it was that they put palm fronds out and welcomed a conqueror. So, John chapter 11. A certain man, Lazarus, was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha, which was about a 40-minute walk from Jerusalem. This was the Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent word to Jesus saying, Lord, the one you love is ill. Interesting wording, isn't it? It's not Lazarus is sick. It's the one you love is ill. When he heard this, Jesus said, this illness isn't fatal. It's for the glory of God so that God's Son can be glorified through it. Very interesting. Verse 5 says, Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. When he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was. That's not really the response of a good friend, is it? If you heard that your best friend was sick, you would try and get over and visit your friend. Jesus' response is rather strange here. He stayed where he was. After 2 days, he said to his disciples, let's return to Judea. The disciples replied, Rabbi, the Jewish opposition wants to stone you, but you want to go back? We're talking a biblical stoning, not the kind of stoning that happens in British Columbia. Okay, we're not talking about that. This is the kind where you throw stones at someone. Jesus answered, aren't there 12 hours in the day? Whoever walks in the day doesn't stumble because they see the light of the world, but whoever walks in the night does stumble because the light isn't in them. He continued, our friend Lazarus is sleeping, but I am going in order to wake him up. The disciples said, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will get well. They thought Jesus meant that Lazarus was in a deep sleep, but Jesus had spoken about Lazarus' death. Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. For your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there so that you can believe. Let's go to him. Then Thomas, the one they called Didymus, not Doubtimus, Didymus, said to the other disciples, let us go too so that we may die with Jesus. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was a little less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to comfort Martha and Mary after their brother's death. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to him. And while Mary remained in the house, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. They knew that Jesus had the power to heal. They were confident of it. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask God will give it to you. Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. And Martha replied, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Not a whole lot of faith there, right? I know that though in some time in the future, He will rise on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Martha's reply was, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, God's Son, the one who is coming into the world. After she said this, she went and spoke privately to her sister Mary. The teacher is here, and he's calling for you. There's a whole group of people around Mary, so he kind of whispered in her ear. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to Jesus. He hadn't entered the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were comforting Mary in the house saw her get up and leave so quickly, they followed her. They assumed she was going to mourn at the tomb again. When Mary arrived where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said the same thing that her sister had said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, where have you laid him? They replied, Lord, come and see. Come and see. Jesus began to cry. In the King James, what does it say? Jesus wept. The Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, he healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone covered the entrance. Just imagine that for a minute. A cave that's a tomb with a stone rolled in front of it. Does that bring up any memories for you? Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, Lord, that's not a good idea. The smell will be awful. He's been in there for 4 days. Jesus replied, didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see God's glory? So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me. Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied and his face covered with a cloth. Why did they tie up dead people? I don't quite understand that part. But his feet and his hands were tied, so he kind of came out like this, shuffling along. And what does Jesus say? Untie him and let him go. Untie him and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who came with Mary and saw what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. The tattletales. There's always the tattletales who run off to the authorities and let them know what's going on. So what are some of the things that we know from John chapter 11 and 12? We know that Jesus had some really close friends. I think this is important because it showed his own human need and desire to be in relationship with people. He was surrounded by his disciples all the time, but there's something special about friendship, close friendship. One of his best friends got really sick, and instead of rushing over to heal him, he stayed where he was, knowing that his friend was going to die. Jesus went to Mary and Martha only after he knew that Lazarus was dead, knowing that Father had something different in store for Lazarus. It is one thing to heal a living person from a terminal illness. It is something quite different to bring a dead person who had been dead for 4 days back to life again. That is a whole different category of miracle. We know that there were a lot of people who witnessed this astounding miracle, and they were vocal about it, some for the good, and some so that they could gain some points with the Pharisees. We know that this event cemented the Jewish leaders' resolve to find a way to assassinate Jesus really soon, like before the next Passover feast. Jesus was now a big deal. And from the religious leaders and the Pharisees' perspective, he needed to be silenced for good, so they thought. We also know that this miracle so inspired the people that they now saw, that they now saw Jesus not as much as the miracle vagabond, the miracle worker vagabond from up north, but as someone who actually had real power. In fact, they thought that showed that he had enough power that he could overthrow the Romans. They were somehow convinced that they could make Jesus king. So they set out to welcome him into Jerusalem the Sunday before Passover as the new political leader of Israel. Some had tried to make him king before. Do you remember? One other time in Jesus' journey in life had they tried to make him king. It was after he took a few loaves and a couple fish and turned it into what? Enough food for how many people? 5,000 people. When they saw him take a little bit of food and feed 5,000 people with it, afterwards they came to Jesus with the intention of making him their new king. And what did Jesus do? He slipped away and climbed a mountain by himself. But they had tried to do it before. This is why we have Palm Sunday. The people laying down the palm branches had one set of expectations in their mind, while Jesus, as he so often does even today, had a completely different concept of what was happening on that day. Is Jesus the king? Absolutely, yes. Was he meant to be the political king of Israel in that first century BC or CE Common Era? No. He was welcomed as a king, and he did not stop the people from believing what they believed, because this was a prophetic act of receiving the king. It was a prophecy given, and Carly read it right at the beginning of the service, that this was Jesus fulfilling a prophetic word. In fact, most scholars say that Jesus fulfilled at least 300 prophecies from the Old Testament in his lifetime. Some go as far to say that it was up as many as 574 prophecies from the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled in his life. This was one of those prophecies. The Messiah would ride a donkey and enter Jerusalem. Jesus knew what was going to happen that week. He knew it when he raised Lazarus from the dead. He knew the impact it was going to have on his followers and on those who opposed him. He knew that by raising Lazarus from the dead, that the anger of the Jewish leaders would get hot enough to want to kill him days later. He knew that the parade of his entry would incite the Jewish leaders even more. And he still did it. In fact, he knew, standing in front of Lazarus' tomb, looking at the cave covered by a stone, that in a few days, he too would be the one inside the grave. That he too would come out of the tomb. He knew that his actions that day would lead to his torture and death the following week. He knew. And he still moved forward. Why? Why? If he knew it was going to be so challenging, why did he do it? Because of his love for people. Because of his love for you, his love for me, his love for the people that have gone before us, his love for the people that will come after us. You see, when Jesus says that we are to love our enemies, why does he say that? Because he loves our enemies. When Jesus says, love your neighbors, why does he want us to love our neighbors? Because he loves our neighbors. When he asks us to make a sacrifice, well, it's because he knew how to make a sacrifice with his own life. When Jesus was faced with doing the hard thing, the right thing, and not the easy thing, Jesus chose the hard way, the right way, and not the easy way. How about us? How do we respond to adversity? How do we respond to the tough things in life? Do we shy away from the hard or step right into it? Michelle and I have just walked an 8-month cancer journey with my mom. She was diagnosed last summer in July with a cancer that they could not operate on. And by the early fall, she was working with a palliative team and her doctor and us as a family. And we walked that slow and painful journey of terminal cancer with her until February 27th, just a few weeks ago, when she passed peacefully. That's what we prayed, that it would be peaceful. And she passed peacefully after 9 days in hospice. It was a hard road. We knew that it would be hard, but we chose to step into it with her with grace and much patience. Was I always gracious? No. Was I always patient? No. But we stuck to the hard situation with her until it was finished. Jesus is our daily companion in life. He is with us by his Spirit in the hard and in the easy. He chose the hard and pursued it to the end. May we celebrate Palm Sunday knowing that one day Jesus will in fact physically be King of all creation. Not that he isn't now, we just don't see it. But Palm Sunday was more of a decision on Jesus' part to follow his Father's leading into a stress-filled week that left him hanging on a cross. And he knew it was going to happen. And he still stepped into it. That was a tough choice. Now, he also knew that the very next week would start with a different Sunday. And that a whole new chapter of God followers would begin after that, of which we are the heirs of that new movement that started that very next Sunday. Let's pray. Father, we are thankful. Thankful for sending your son Jesus. Thank you that he accomplished everything that he was meant to accomplish, including his death and burial and resurrection and ascension back into your presence. Thank you that he sent his Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, to live within us, to live out the resurrected life in our lives. And Daddy, as we face hard situations in our lives, may you fill us with strength and courage to step into those hard things, knowing that you are with us. Just like you stepped into this week of the Passion, knowing that Father was with you, Jesus. Thank you. We worship you. We know, Jesus, that you exist, that you are alive in a very different place than what we experience here. And we worship